Welcome to Foundations of Effective Leadership. I'm Johanna Dunleavy, the EFR Operations Director, and I'm excited to be here with Molly Mackey. Molly is one of our trainers and a leadership guru, and we are really excited to have this webinar today and share information at the end about an upcoming Leadership Bootcamp that Molly is facilitating on behalf of EFR. Molly, take it away.
Wonderful. So thank you. Like Johanna mentioned, I work with EFR. I do leadership training with different teams, organizations, and associations all over the US. I appreciate you all joining us. I know it can be hard to take a minute out of your work day. So I always start off a little bit about why I do what I do. Maybe you've had this experience, maybe you haven't, where you've had a couple of days off and you spent it doing things you enjoy with people you love. And then all of a sudden it's that night before work and that wave of dread washes over you, and there's like that rock in your gut and a tightness in your chest, and your head starts spinning, and you don't want to go back. And it's not your job. You're good at your job, and it's not your colleagues. You like them. It's your boss, right? Whether they micromanage you or they take credit for your projects, or maybe they're just a jerk. So I don't believe anybody should have to put up with that. I believe if we intertwine leadership and learning, we can create better leaders, and better leaders equal better lives. Now, for some of you that are on here that say, hey, I don't have a supervisory title right now, I have a little bit different definition of leadership. I believe leaders are those who, regardless of title, lift up others around them. So thank you for being the type of folks that are open to taking the time out to learn today and support folks around you. So what are we going to go over today? We're going to go over a few different things, but we are going to start with a pop quiz. So I would like you to put, without looking it up, okay, no Google or AI, this was a study that came out within the past year or so. What percentage of leaders are accidental, meaning when they first get into a leadership role, they have little or no formal training? So if you would, go ahead and put your guess in the chat there. And Johanna's going to help me monitor the chat. What percentage do you all think of leaders are accidental, meaning when they first get into that leadership role, they have little or no formal training? What are we thinking?
All right, I'm waiting for some. They're rolling in 30%, 75%, 80%, 20%, 60%, 75%. I think 80% is the highest I've seen. Ooh, 76%. Someone's going with a number that's not round. 30%, 73%. I think the lowest number I'm seeing is 20%. The highest number I'm seeing is still 80. Oh, 82% is the highest
82.
now.
Okay, who guessed 82? Who is that?
Oh, let me find their. I will. Oh, who was it? I just saw her. It's hard as they. Oh, well, someone just put 82.1%, but we're going to go with the person. It was Muriel Burnett. Muriel put 82%.
So, Muriel, if you would put in the chat, and if Johanna, you could write it down. For some reason, I'm not seeing the chat. Your address. We are going to send you a leadership book. So this just came out this year. It is the 6 Principles of Trauma-Informed Care, but applied to leadership. So wonderful. Yep, the answer is 82%. So 82% of folks, when they first get in to that leadership position, have little or no formal training.
All right.
We're going to ask for one other thing here. If you all would go to Menti, so it's menti.com, and I want to know, what are your biggest leadership challenges currently? So let me share my screen real quick here. I'm going to actually share my entire screen so you all can see Menti. So it's menti.com. When you go to Menti, it's going to ask you for a code. There will also be a QR code that will pop up here. So if you could, this is all anonymous, so you can put whatever answers you'd like, but I really want to know from this group, what have been your biggest leadership challenges currently? Ooh. Somebody mentioned lack of civility right off the bat. I'm actually in the process of researching civility and uncivility in the workplace for a presentation. Okay, lack of training, correcting behavior. folks not stepping up, navigating boundaries, that is difficult, especially we see that when folks go from individual contributor or peer to supervising folks they used to be peers with. All right, team dynamics. Folks are juggling a lot of stuff. Looks like avoidance. All right. Wonderful. Thank you. So we only have about 45 minutes to an hour or so. So unfortunately, we can't cover all of those topics, but we are going to cover some foundations of leadership. We're going to cover communication and miscommunication. We will cover the importance of psychological safety. We will also look at recognizing unhealthy conflict. And then more importantly, how do we create healthy conflict? Now, you guys do have the chat button, so if there are things that you agree, disagree, thoughts, ideas, you are more than welcome to put that in the chat. Johanna's going to be monitoring that for us here. So let's start off with communication. We know with leadership and communication, there's a huge disparity between when you ask leaders, hey, how good are you at communicating? And you ask them and they're like, yeah, I'm awesome at communicating. And then you go ask their team. And those results look very differently. They're like, what? You mean not awesome at not communicating? So we'll go over just some of those foundations. Again, we can't touch on everything, but I am going to start off with a story here. We know for effective communication, stories are actually 22 times more memorable than facts and figures. And while you probably won't remember that fact or figure, you probably remember some of the stories that we tell this morning. So what I want you to do is I want you to imagine that you are a first grade teacher. It is the first full week of school, and there's that excitement, the smell of fall and school supplies in the air. When one morning you're working with a little boy, when this little girl trots up to you and she is super excited, she's got something to give you. So you tell her, just a minute, May. Once I am finished with him, I will be right with you. And the minute you leave that little boy's side, she trots up to you and she hands you something. And she's got this grin from ear to ear. And so you're like, oh, it looks like a nice handwritten note. And so you open it and you're a little bit stunned because with what it says and her expression on her face, they don't match. And so you look at the note and you look at her and you look at the note and then you start asking some questions and you say, May, were you joking? And she's like, no. Okay, so maybe she didn't write it. May, did you write this? Yeah, because the note says this. And for those of you that can't read, it is a little bit light, but it says, I kill you. And she's sitting there just grinning at you. And so you finally ask the right question. You say, May, what does the note say? And she smiles and she says, it says, I like you. You're a really nice teacher. So this is the actual picture of the note my then 6-year-old gave to her first grade teacher last year. Okay. And this is her lovely Facebook post about it. That is little May in the middle. That is her with duct tape. I asked her the other day, I was like, May, what are you doing with that duct tape? She's like, I finally found a way for Mira, her little sister, to be quiet. So some of you are raising doctors and lawyers. I'm apparently raising a female serial killer. But anyway, the story reminds me of my favorite quote on communication. The single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it's taken place. How many times do leaders have that illusion that the message that they sent is being received in the way that they intended? So many times we have the illusion that people are getting the message the way that we wanted them to, right? So May had the illusion when she gave her teacher that note that she was reading the same thing that she meant to put, right? So when we look at the overall communication process, we have a sender, so that would be you guys as leadership. You have a message and you encode it in language. You send it through a channel. Now this could be one-on-one talks, it could be in a team meeting, it could be a text, it could be a memo, whatever channel you choose to send it in. Now, there's a person that has to receive that message and they have to decode it, which means they have to figure out what are you meaning by that message. Now, here is where it gets tricky. Any point inside that communication process, there can be noise. And noise is whatever gets in the way of someone receiving the message that we meant for them. Now, sometimes it can be actual physical noise. I was working with a trucking group not too long ago, and it was perfect timing. We got to this slide, we're talking about noise, and some guy's cell phone goes off with like duck noises. Okay. Had another group I was working with, literally, again, same perfect timing, was down working with the vet group, and we got to this, and then they started doing construction right outside the door. But it doesn't have to be physical noise. It can be anything that gets in the way of us sending the message, them receiving it, and them understanding the message. So I would love to hear from you in the chat. What are some examples of noise where you work? When you guys are communicating to team members, what gets in the way? What does that look like? And again, you can put stuff in the chat. And Johanna, if you're up for it, just reading some of the stuff that folks have put in that chat.
I sure will.
Thank you. What are y'all thinking this morning? What gets in the way of you guys sending messages and team members receiving?
All right, I see not listening, negativity, personal needs of the employees versus what is needed in the workplace, insecurity, work from home when kids and animals are yelling and fighting and barking. Not everyone keeps up with email, Teams messages, true misunderstanding of intentions, cell phone distractions, customers, interruptions from customers, people thinking that there is something unsaid rather than taking what is said literally.
Wonderful. Those are awesome.
Lack of psychological safety, which I know is a nice segue for what you're also going to be talking about.
Awesome. 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 Nice work. Sorry, when someone said kids running around and, dogs barking, it was a flashback to 2020 when I would have to take meetings. It was all work from home and the kids were, trying to do school online. And I just remember one day, May was really little, like my two older kids, they were on with, their school on their computer. And I got off the meeting and there's just like raisins everywhere. She'd smeared lipstick everywhere. So definitely great examples. Yeah, and sometimes we can use the same language, but because of different perceptions, because of different experiences or lack of experiences, that person will decode it completely differently from what we meant. So a few months ago, my husband comes home. He's a firefighter, paramedic. He works 24 on, 48 off. And he was driving home after his 24-hour shift, gets home and he was like, oh yeah, the state troopers are pulling over truckers. It's like, okay. He's like, yeah, they're pulling over them and weighing them. So they're not giving them tickets. They're just seeing what they weighed. And I was super confused by this, embarrassingly enough, because I don't have much experience in that section of business. So I am thinking that the lovely truckers were stepping out of their cab and getting on to a scale. And I'm like, I didn't know you had to be a certain weight to have a CDL. It's like, no, Molly, they're weighing the trucks, which makes a whole lot more sense, okay? So we know there's different types of communication. So we have verbal, so that is our spoken communication. We have nonverbal, so this is anything from facial expressions to posture, eye contact, hand movements, anything that we do with our body that's not our voice. And there's been some really interesting experiments they have done with nonverbal communication. And one of them was done by some Harvard professors. And so what they did is they brought people in and they sat them down and they showed them a 30-second video clip of a professor teaching without the volume. And they asked them, how would you rate this professor? And what was really interesting is just from observing their body language, many of them rated very similarly to folks that had been in an entire semester with that professor. Again, just based on their nonverbal communication. An even more interesting study from Vanessa Van Edwards. So she does a lot with communication. She's written a couple books that I would recommend. One is called Captivate. The other one is called Cues. And she wanted to know, why is it that there are certain TED Talks that go completely viral? Like they've got over 10 million views. And there's some that maybe have like 10,000, right? TED's a big name. They have famous people. They all have different ideas. They all have approximately, 20 minutes or less. What makes the videos stand out? And what they found was the ones that went like completely viral in the 18 to 20-minute talk, they had around 400 or more hand gestures within that talk. In the ones that didn't, they had around 200 or less. So it wasn't the person, it wasn't the idea, it was how that idea was presented with nonverbal communication. And I always like to give the example when I'm in class. If I got on the webinar with you guys today and I just sat like this and I was like, today we're going to go over leadership. It wouldn't matter if I had the best slides in the world. A lot of you would have work emergencies and probably hop off the webinar. Okay. We've got written communication, so that can be emails, memos, text messages, etc. We've got listening, so active listening skills, and then we've also got visual communication. If you all would, in the chat, where at work do you guys see the most instances of miscommunication? Is it written? Is it nonverbal? Is it listening? What do you guys think? Where you guys are working when you're communicating with staff, where do we see the most instances of miscommunication?
Before I start sharing some of the answers, I have had a few people, maybe 3 or 4, say they don't see the chat. And so it's hard for me to know what you're using, if you're using an application or just logged in through a web browser, but there should be like 2 little chat icons, like the rectangles with the little chat, like a typical chat icon. I don't know why I'm struggling to communicate right now, Molly. But that is where these are coming in. Okay, so to answer Molly's question, we've got a lot of nonverbals. We've got listening, emails and text messages, nonverbals, visuals. I have someone chiming in to help with those who can't see the chat. It's the box with a question mark, which is where people are typing. So maybe if you hover over to that under questions. Thank you, Peter, for sharing that. Written communication, verbal. Nobody wants to talk face to face anymore.
Oh, that is a really interesting point. I've heard that from a lot of different supervisors. So a lot of people mention written. We know, and there are some very specific stats on this from a social psychologist, that over 90% of where we derive understanding from communication comes from nonverbal and comes from tone. And so when we look at written communication, we send that message in one mood or one tone that we think that we're portraying. However, the person on the other end will get that message and they will read it in whatever mood they're in. And there's a lovely Key and Peele skit. So they're comedians and they have a skit where they're texting back and forth. And one of them's in a super great mood and one of them's like super angry. So one of them's reading all the text super happy. One of them's about ready to fight. I can't play it because it does have some naughty words on it, but you can look it up on your own, preferably not on your work computer, but it's just a great example. A couple other folks mentioned non-verbal. Again, sometimes we'll look at somebody's face and they may be concentrating or they may be thinking about stuff, but we think they're mad or they're scowling. When I did a leadership boot camp last spring up here around the Cedar Falls area, there was a lady that was sitting in the front row and she shared with me, she was asking for some feedback from her supervisor. And she said, what can I do to be better? And our supervisor said, I don't know if you realize this, but when you're processing something, when you're thinking about something, you get this look like this, your brow furrows and you get this scowl look on your face. And she said, look, because I'm your supervisor and I have that relationship with you, I know that that's what you're doing. She said, but when we're in meetings with a bunch of different departments, which we are every week, they may portray it as something else, right? That you're questioning their idea or something. So let's try to, make sure that we're monitoring our non-verbal communication. Yep, because it can definitely get misconstrued, or what we call, some people call it resting RBF, resting bothered face. Okay, I got that from Vanessa Van Edwards because I don't like to swear in leadership training. But yeah, it can be in any one of these. So, one of the things that folks also struggle with in communication is having accountability conversations, and having accountability conversations in a way where they're respectful. And once we have that conversation, somebody's not just going to walk out the door. Okay, this is the accountability matrix. If we have low to no support and we're not having those accountability conversations, folks get into the neglectful zone. Now, I had a really good example of this when I was going back to school for my master's. I was talking to one of my peers in class. She was an engineer. She worked at a company down in Cedar Rapids, and she was telling me she would only meet face to face and spend quality time with her engineering supervisor one time a year, literally. And it was just because HR made him do the performance reviews. Okay, that is stunning. I came from environments where you met with your supervisor at least once every 30 days to check in, etc. What's interesting about the neglectful zone is that people perform worse when you ignore them than if you're in the punitive zone. Now, we don't want folks in the punitive zone either, but punitive zone is where there's low to no support, but you're only numbers, 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 get your numbers done. If you don't, you're getting punished for it. Okay, little mistakes, big mistakes, whatever. Every time you come into my office, I'm going to write you up or yell at you or what have you. Okay. Where I see a lot of folks, and this is because of staffing, a lot of rural folks struggle with this, they'll give folks a bunch of support. So we'll train you, give you support, we'll practically do the job for you. But because we're so short staffed, we're not having those accountability conversations like we need to. Okay. Where we want folks to be is have that combination of providing a good amount of support and having a high degree of accountability in the right way. Okay. So, one of the things, we don't have time today, but Johanna is going to give you just an overview of our leadership boot camp. We will cover how do you have that accountability structure, additional communication techniques. I don't know if any of you have read Never Split the Difference. Chris Voss was an FBI hostage negotiator. So he gives some really great tips on active listening, looping, labeling, mirroring exact words that can really help to minimize miscommunications. Okay. So that was just a little bit over communication, some foundations. We are going over, like we said, 3 different things today. So just some reminders on communication. The next part is psychological safety. And if there was one thing out of all of the different leadership techniques and ideas that I teach, I wish more leaders knew about psychological safety and implemented ways to create a psychologically safe workplace. Okay. So, what is psychological safety? Psychological safety means people are able to come in, they're able to show their true selves, they're able to try different ideas without negative consequences. So, negative consequences for their self image, status, or career. Okay? We know that if people feel isolated, if they feel embarrassed, if they feel like they're not part of the team, it actually lights up the same parts of the brain that physical pain does. So I like to give the example, if I were to say, all of you turn your camera on and dance for 2 minutes. Now, I wouldn't actually ask you to do that, but most folks, their first thought is, oh, absolutely not. I don't want to embarrass myself. I'm not going to twerk in front of my boss. Like, no. Okay. There is a concept called interpersonal fear or interpersonal risk. If you think about how we evolved and how we survived, we're not the fastest animal, we're not the strongest, but we survived because we worked together. We survived in tribes. So there are times where people won't bring up ideas or trying something new or push back against that status quo because that interpersonal fear and interpersonal risk. I work with a lot of leaders that say, you know what, my door's open. I have an open door. Well, that's great. If you don't create the right type of environment, the right type of psychological safety, people are not going to walk through that door. It doesn't matter how open you have it. I've also had folks that have had leaders in the past say, I have an open door, but when they come in to ask questions or try something new, they get shot down and they feel embarrassed. I still remember one gal I was working with, she's in her early 60s, and she shared a story about her first job out of college where she had one of those bosses that said, hey, my door's open. But if she went in and asked questions, she just got humiliated. Okay. That stayed with her for the last 40 plus years in her career, right? Her supervisors had to earn her trust, had to do a lot to create that psychological safety. So we know in psychological safe teams, people can take risks, they can try different things, they can push back against the status quo, and they feel accepted and respected within their teams. So the background from psychological safety actually came from Amy Edmondson. In the 1990s, Amy Edmondson had a theory, and her theory was that high performing teams made less mistakes than low performing teams, which seems like a pretty intuitive theory. Again, she didn't start off studying psychological safety. So she joined this huge research group that was studying medication errors within hospitals. And she gets her data back, and she describes in one of her books just staring at her computer screen, and her heart just dropped because the data was correlated exactly opposite to her theory. And so she did with a lot of us do when we get the answer that we don't like. She said, you know what? I am going to join a larger research group. I'll hire my own research assistant, and we'll see if this theory, still holds or if we're getting the same data. And again, the high performing teams were reporting just as many, if not more, than the low performing teams. Why? What would cause that? You guys can put some different ideas in the chat. Why would the high performing teams make just as many, if not more, mistakes than the low performing teams? What are some of the answers we have out there, Johanna?
They're taking more risks. They're not afraid to make mistakes.
Yep.
They're trying new things to get different results without repercussions. They feel free to take chances.
Yeah.
Lots of less fear is what I'm seeing.
Yeah. And all of those are correct. In addition, they felt safe to report their mistakes. Okay. In the high performing teams, you guys are right. They're taking risks, they're pushing the status quo. How the mistakes were handled was completely different in the high performing, high trust teams versus the low performing, low trust teams. If you made a mistake in the high performing, high trust teams, you trusted that you would be coached through it. Mistakes were used as learning opportunities. In the low performance, low trust teams, it was very punitive. You made a mistake, you got yelled at, etc. So what they found was that the key word there was reporting as many, if not more, right? High performing teams felt like they could report mistakes. Low performing teams, what they found is a lot of those teams were hiding their mistakes because they didn't want to get punished. Now, her research got buried in some academic journal that most people won't read. It wasn't until Google did their Aristotle project from 2012 to 2016. And Google looked at their teams within their organization. And they said, you know what? We're smart, we're engineers. We are going to find the algorithm for the best team ever. And so they measured everything they could measure: team size, age, education, literally how often they had lunch together. I always joke, probably height and weight too. I mean, if you could put data on a spreadsheet, they measured it. And then when they got their data back, there wasn't one thing that all of their high performing teams had in common until one of their researchers stumbled upon Amy Edmondson's original work. And they said, that's it. All of our high performing teams have a high degree of psychological safety. People can come in, they can take risks, they can try different things. If they made a mistake, they're used as learning opportunities. Okay. Now, what was really interesting about the Aristotle Project is many times within an organization, we talk about organizational culture. But within the 180 teams that Google measured in their organization, they had a huge disparity between the low performing low trust teams and the high performing high trust teams. So, what we know is that psychological safety is really at that team level. And I can tell you, I had a situation where I worked at a lovely human service organization. And the first team that I worked in, they had gossiping, they had toxic behavior, low trust, low psychological safety. When I moved up into the organization and I moved into different teams, it was a completely different experience, different supervisor, different amount of psychological safety. So, the good news for you as leaders is that you can help create that within your team. Now, since then, there's been a whole bunch of different research from Harvard Business Review to Forbes to Accenture, really showing that if you want a high performing team, you have to have that high degree of psychological safety. So, in addition to Amy Edmondson's research, there was a gentleman named Tim Clark, and he was studying over in Europe, getting his advanced degree when him and his wife moved back to the US. And she's like, that's great, Timmy. You and your ideas, get a job. And so he did, because he wanted to see, are my theories on psychological safety applicable in the workforce? And he actually got a job at a manufacturing plant as a plant manager. And in his theory of psychological safety, if we put permission on the bottom axis and respect on the other one, people first have to feel like they're part of the team, right? They've got to feel included. That's that inclusion safety. Once they feel included, they can feel safe to learn. Once they feel safe to learn, they can feel safe to contribute. Now, challenger safety is being able to challenge ideas, being able to push back against the status quo. And if you think about how fast things are changing with technology and AI and things going around the world, we need our folks to get to that top level of psychological safety. But very few teams get there. What percentage, again, put it in the chat, would you guess of teams that actually get up to that challenger safety? Again, put in the chat, what percentage of teams get up to that challenger safety?
All right, I'm seeing 40%, 15%, 10%, 21%, 45%. I think 5% is the lowest percentage, and I'm seeing that from several people. And I think 45% has been the highest, and I'm seeing that from a few people.
Yeah, so those of you on the lowest end are correct. So this can vary a little bit by country, but according to Tim Clark's research, only 5 to 10% of teams get up to that challenger safety. So think about how many good ideas are being, left on the table, or being left in folks' minds because they don't feel safe to speak up. Okay. Now, anytime I talk about soft skills in leadership, I always like to bring in hard numbers. So this comes from a variety of different sources. The overall source is Accenture. You can see the source there. We find that if folks feel psychologically safe within their team, there's a 27% reduction in turnover. They're 50% more productive, 74% less stressed. And I know with the teams that I'm working with from, the Midwest to both coasts, burnout is a huge issue right now across industries. One of the largest things that contributes to burnout is lack of agency. So in psychologically safe teams, people can come in and each member has input into how they carry that work out. Right? I always coach leaders, your job is to set those expectations, to communicate those expectations clearly. Their job is to figure out how to get there. And it may be different than the way you as the leader would get there, but if it's safe and it's ethical, that's okay. So there's an activity that I like to do with teams. I give them a certain amount of materials and I say, you need to build something. And what's really interesting is that in the hundreds of folks that I have done this activity with, there's only been one time where somebody has built the same thing as somebody else. Right? There can be a bunch of different ways to get there. People need and want that autonomy at work. And I got a question from one of my good friends at the Iowa Hospital Association. He was telling me, we were talking about different leadership training, and one of the people that he had hired asked a really good question. So she would send out communications for review, and sometimes people would like nitpick little details. And so she would ask, is it wrong or is it a preference? Okay, I thought that was a really powerful question to ask as leaders, right? So we also see psychologically safe teams are more engaged. There's a 41% decrease in safety incidents. And that's because people speak up before something goes to the point where it's a reportable incident, okay? So how do we create that? We don't have a whole lot of time to get into that today, but as leaders, being able to ask questions, being able to reward risk. And we're not talking unethical or unsafe risk. We're talking about people trying different things, right? Whether they succeed or not. And then debriefing them on what went right, what didn't, what ideas do we have moving forward. For leaders, if you want folks to be able to take risks, you have to be able to role model and take those risks yourself. In addition to that, we want leaders to be able to admit when they're wrong. I don't know if you guys have ever had the experience where you've had a leader that was never wrong, like even when they were wrong. Okay, that's not how we want to be. We know there is a gentleman, Tim Elmore. He wrote a great book called The 8 Paradoxes of Leadership. And he talks about people do want a leader that's confident. They also want a leader that's humble enough to say when they're wrong, humble enough to say, I don't know, but I'll work with you to get the answer. Or here was a time I failed. Or, hey, you know what? That's something that I need to learn more about. We know the fourth step in creating that psychological safety is just encouraging ongoing learning. So for leaders themselves and for their team members. Okay. Now, the last thing we're going to go over is we're going to go over unhealthy versus healthy conflict. Then we'll take some different questions. Depending on who you ask in what industry, if we look at overall, 85% of people have experienced some type of unhealthy conflict at work. Okay, now when I work with certain groups and I ask them, have you had unhealthy conflict at work? Sometimes that goes up to 100%. And I like the acronym BEWARE for understanding what creates unhealthy conflict. So many times people want to blame conflict just on an individual. Now, in some cases that could be true, but more likely than not, there is an environment or a situation that causes that unhealthy conflict. If we just have two options, that can cause unhealthy conflict. If we put people in competition with each other, where it's an everything or nothing, winner take all, win or lose type situation. So if you think about a team of nurses, say there's 11 folks, one is a supervisor, the other 10 are individual contributors. That one supervisor goes to leave and 3 people apply for that position. Now that's an everything or nothing, win or lose. You either get the title and the position and the pay bump or you don't. And that can cause a lot of unhealthy conflict within an organization, right? If we fall into the trap of the attribution bias, where we look at somebody's behavior, especially behavior that we don't like, and we attribute it to their character or lack of moral character instead of the environment that they're in, right? If people get into righteousness or rage, we know that it is harder to get people off of rage than it is any other emotion, even sadness, okay? Now, sometimes if we've ruled out the situation, if we've ruled out the environment, there can be times, and I always put an asterisk on this, that someone is what we call a conflict entrepreneur, okay? Because they create conflict like it's their job, okay? You know them, I know them, you're probably thinking of them right now. Unfortunately, a lot of times they have been at the organization a long period of time and they're good at their job, which is why they're not fired yet, okay? So in a longer presentation, when we talk about conflict, we talk about how do you address conflict entrepreneurs. Now, because conflict can be kind of a word that has a lot of emotions in it, we always have to remind people that there is constructive conflict. There's unhealthy conflict, but there's constructive conflict. And when we create that environment of high trust, great communication, wonderful psychological safety, we can create an environment where we have constructive conflict, because then we're getting multiple perspectives, innovations, and ideas. Okay. If we compare high conflict, that drives disconnection. It's a lot of times us versus them. There's high levels of negative emotion, anger, frustration, judgment. Communication can decline. So I always show a slide where someone's brain is on conflict. Their hormones go up, adrenaline, cortisol, all the unhealthy stuff. And what it does is when people get flustered, it is hard for them to think rational thoughts, communicate well. And so with those high levels of emotion, communication can decline, and sometimes it completely stops. Winning is the primary goal with unhealthy conflict. I want my way. I want it for my team. I don't care about the rest of folks. Okay. Constructive conflict is let's bring ideas together. Okay. It's us together. Because we have that trust and high psychological safety, there's not that negative emotion and judgment. Yeah, we have different ideas, but we trust that we both or we all want what's best for everyone. Okay. Communication is candid, so we're very blunt about things, and solutions and the best solutions for everyone are the primary goal. So we have gone over a ton of stuff today. I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. But if you would for me, and we've kind of covered a broad range of things, while you guys are thinking or typing in any questions, I am going to ask us to go back to Menti. And I want to know, what is one thing that you learned today that you will be taking back to your team and organization from this presentation? Again, we know that we can't cover, leadership is a huge topic, right? The broad vastness of leadership training. But what is one thing that you learned this morning that you're going to be able to take back? Awesome. Psychological safety. So I would recommend Amy Edmondson's written 3 books. I really like her first 2. So they are called The Fearless Organization and Teaming. And they've got wonderful stories, great examples of the importance of psychological safety. Wonderful. Awesome. A lot of psychological safety. Is it wrong or is it a preference? Yes, I love that question. I've been using it quite a bit when I've been coaching so many years. So wonderful. And again, that will stay up. So if you're typing, please type. I always like to review the answers to see what's really resonating with folks. So again, if you're typing, please still type, please answer. I always review stuff at the end. A lot of you mentioned psychological safety. So this is just a preview of the Leadership Bootcamp. One of the things that we really dive deeply into is, if psychological safety is so important, how do we create it? So those 4 things that I kind of breezed over, we dive deep into how do you ask the right questions, how do you reward risk, what can you do as a role model, and how can you structure consistent ongoing learning with your team. So are there any questions in the chat, Johanna? If not, I will turn it over to you to share a little bit more about stuff we've got coming up.
Yeah, so right now I'm just seeing a lot of similar comments to, I think some people might have added their comments in the chat instead of using Menti, but a lot of the same information or feedback in the chat. But I'm excited to share with you all that we have an upcoming opportunity in June with Molly and EFR. I had the amazing opportunity to attend Molly's Leadership Bootcamp last fall in Des Moines, and I knew that I wanted to offer it to our EFR EAP customers. And so we have a Leadership Bootcamp coming up in June. The dates are June 16th and 17th. It will be located in Johnston, Iowa at Delta Dental at their office. They're hosting it for us. It's a beautiful office. If you're not in the Des Moines area, it is also in a location that has a lot of hotels conveniently located. I know there's a Hilton right next door. So great location, great content. If you scan the QR code, you can be taken to a registration page where you will learn more about this. But through this 2-day series, you will have interactive trainings, things like trauma-informed leadership, setting and holding boundaries, building teams with trust, navigating burnout, having balance in your life, because we know that you're more than leaders, and we know that when you come to work, you're bringing a lot of things from home to work with you. So we're going to have a lot of great opportunities to help you understand the benefits that you have available through EFR's EAP, as well as through EFR's leadership benefits. So the program is 2 days of that interactive training. And then after, you get 6 months of tools, assessments, and fieldwork. So those will come via email every month for 6 months. And then you'd have 2 opportunities for coaching sessions with Molly. So leadership coaching is a great resource, and it's often something that people just don't know how to access, or maybe they don't know if they need it. And I think that going through this boot camp, you will start to have an idea of the areas where you want to refine your leadership skills, and also areas where you might need some help and coaching. And so that is something that Molly is going to be making herself available for. So 2 leadership coaching sessions with Molly, in addition to 6 months of worksheets, assessments, and those come after the 2 days of training. So this is a $650 investment, but it, is a bargain when you think about all of the things that you're getting for it. So scan that QR code. Everyone who attended today will also be getting follow-up communication via email about this. So you'll, if you for some reason scan the QR code now and then you close that web browser, it's okay, because we will be sending you a communication via email from EFR, and it will include that information. But lots of great resources to share, and it's going to take a couple of days to share them. Lunch will be provided. Molly does a great job of bringing snacks and fidgets, because I've been to her workshop. And, I was just telling someone the other day, I'm like, she has the best fidgets. You're just going to love them. So it's a really fun an enlightening experience, and I'd be excited if you all considered joining. We only have 50 spots, and we've already sold 8 seats, so there's only 42 seats available. So we want to keep it a little bit smaller so that you can have more opportunities to pair and share, form small groups and share, and then have more access to Molly throughout the day. Questions about that? And we can go on to the next couple of slides, Molly. Just as a reminder, you're all here most likely because you have EFR's EAP benefits. Don't forget that you have access to reach out to us by phone 24/7. lots of resources available, and it's not just for you, it's for your household family members. And like I mentioned earlier, a lot of times what we bring to the workplace is from what's brewing at home. And so it could be a relationship struggle or a parenting dynamic or co-parenting dynamic, or maybe you're taking care of an elder loved one and you don't really know what your resources or next steps are. We have a lot of great areas that you can tap into across the spectrum of well-being. So whether you're feeling like you have some financial stress, or maybe you're not feeling socially connected, or I don't want anyone's identity to get compromised or stolen, but we know it happens. We have resources for all of that. So think beyond the counseling when you think of your EAP benefit, and also think about how it can help all of your family members. And then the final slide just provides that contact information for you to reach out to EFR with our phone number, 800-327-4692. It is answered 24/7 by master's level counselors. So oftentimes you're not in the office when you want to make that phone call. If you don't have our number programmed into your cell phone, put it in there just so you can call us. It might be on a weekend or it might be on a weeknight, but we are available 24/7. And the person who answers the phone is going to know how to help you in that situation, especially if you're having a mental health crisis. And I think that, a lot of people don't know in that moment who to call or what to do, but call EFR because we are here to help you and we can connect you to resources. We also have a great website, efr.org. You can head over there, access all sorts of great information. But again, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And then the email will be coming with information about the upcoming boot camp.
Wonderful. And I will say, I had a personal issue several years ago, and we had EFR as our EAP program, and they did a wonderful job setting me up with a counselor. The program that we had 6 free counseling sessions. So, sometimes folks don't want to go to counseling because they're not like, hey, I can't afford it. But depending on the program you have, it can, help mitigate some of those costs. So we know we want leaders to take care of themselves. So I'm going to stop sharing here. Like Johanna mentioned, we have a lovely leadership boot camp. We do make it fun. So that is part of it. It's structured very specifically. So we know I would love for folks to be able to do like a year-long program, but it can be so hard for people to get out of the office. So that's why it's those 2 days. People from different companies come in. And so the way that Leadership Bootcamp is facilitated is you're going to learn from the PowerPoints, but you're going to learn from each other as well. And then those once a month follow-up for 6 months where you get different assessments. What are your strengths? What are your values? Stuff you guys can do with your team, so that, how many times we go to training and we are like, yes, I'm going to get back and I'm do all the things. And then life happens and we do none of the things. So those emails help. So would love to see some of you folks. Again, thank you for being here this morning. I appreciate it. I'm glad folks took a few things on psychological safety and is it wrong or is it preference? I'll look over the other ones as well here, but I think, are we good to go, Johanna?
So there is one question from someone asking if there's going to be another leadership boot camp later in the year because this person happens to be on PTO that week. And at this point, we don't have any more scheduled through EFR, but Molly does some outside of EFR. And so that could be maybe something that I can connect you with. So for the person who asked that question, I'm taking your contact information down and I'll connect with you via email.
Wonderful. And we did consider, depending on how the one in the summer goes, if we have a wait list, there could be, we don't have one scheduled yet, but we want to see how it goes. And I will tell you, I've been to Kansas and we've had a few sell out. So yeah. Wonderful.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Molly. Appreciate your time and talents. And thanks to everyone who joined today and contributed to a really rich conversation.
Wonderful.
Make it a great day. Bye-bye.